you're interested there. So, yeah. So, I'm going to pop a couple of things up on the screen just for everyone. So I'm going to pop a version of the meeting notes themselves up for everyone, so we can see those. And this is the so the meeting notes themselves. We have a link to the agenda, the about the interest group itself. I was just about to pop in that into the meeting notes as well. So if you're interested in understanding the background of the meeting of the interest group, I'm going to start actually with an introduction to the interest group, some background to some of the meeting documents, and there's copies of slides from those presenters we have today, and the details down the bottom there of if you could please enter your contact details there. So the agenda for today, as I say, this is I'll come back to the agenda in a little bit, but just by way of introduction, and feed into what this group's actually interested in, and what we've been doing over recent years. And I'll come back to a more detailed elements of the agenda. But the emphasis today is certainly on data and metadata quality in the social sciences. And so there's an agenda of speakers, but this picks up a theme that this interest group was actually established on this group's been around now for about 3 years, and we've met several times. But the group itself was actually established with a remit to focus on 3 areas of interest that was established in some of the early birds of a feather sessions of the interest group. Really kicked off in the plenary in Philadelphia. And so the 3 things we were interested in within the interest group were looking at quality of data, understanding automation and improvements in data and metadata quality, data policy, looking at the alignment and simplification of data policies for making data available and for using data, and for the role and the experiences of sensitive data in the social sciences as well, recognizing the large proportion of data in the social sciences was high, sensitive or highly sensitive, and then what options and what shared interest do we have in understandings around sensitive data and collaboration on sensitive data. So over the period, the group's met 4 times now as a formal interest group, and over that period, we've actually now established a joint group, interest group in sensitive data, and that group met yesterday here at RDA. That would be Wednesday for most of you, Thursday here in Australia. And this is the picking up certainly on the second of the key themes of the social science interest group. That's the intent of today's meeting, really orienting around quality of data as the focus. So it's really kicking off this area of activity for the interest group and looking at some options for what our thematic activities might be in this area. And so that brings me back to the agenda for today, which, as I say, what we propose for today is to further, our core area of interests around data quality itself. So, as I say, the emphasis is it's an information session as much as anything. We've got 6 speakers for today who will be presenting, really looking at current activities around data and metadata quality in the social sciences and related domains, and to get an understanding of what do we know about what's already going on in the social sciences that we might be able to pick up on for future activity. So we have theme discussions around data quality, around metadata quality, particularly coming out of activities through different partners of SHOC and ZESTA in Europe, and the last session. We had hoped to actually have a look at quality assurance in other domains, but unfortunately, those last 2 presenters are unable to join us. So at this point, we'll then be looking to discuss a breakout discussion at the end. We'll probably do that as a joint group rather than as a breakout group around what are the set of shared interests that we might have in future activities for working on data quality issues within this interest group. And we're proposing three broad areas. We'll come back to those, but just to bring this to the fore for everyone, really thinking about whether a couple of conceptual papers may be of interest for a collaboration from this group, and potentially also a working group on data quality within and across domains. And I'll talk to, there are a couple of sessions actually that have occurred in this ADA plenary as well, that would be likely groups we could reach out to within there. Okay, so let's say, so our presenters for today, let's say I'm going to kick off the presentations really looking at, okay, so there's a message from Alexandra around the final closing session, closing plenary, just for those who are interested here at carrying. Oh, it appears to quarter to the hour at the end of this session, just a heads up for everyone. Okay, so as I say, I'm going to kick off presentations for today. It is unfortunately also well, not fortunately for those in Canada, but not for us, in official statistics and international social science data projects. Our colleagues from Statistics Canada, because it is a public holiday in Canada, isn't able to join us. It was called away to family duties, unfortunately, in the last couple of days, so he wasn't able to step out there. So I'm going to kick off with really a bit of an overview of what do we know about some of the activities around data quality in both some of the international projects and in official statistics as well, as a starting point for here. Then we're going to have a series of presentations from colleagues at the QFAIR group, one of the other activity groups here, and a series of the CESDA metadata presentations. I'm just going to make sure I've got my timer on here. We're going to probably hold questions for the presentations if you can type them in the chat, but rather we're trying to keep these presentations to about 8 to 10 minutes each. There's plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So we probably won't take particular questions unless there's points of clarification through the presentations themselves. We'll hold them for the end there. Okay, so let me just bring up my presentation just to get into here. So my presentation is going to focus on, say, a broad brush discussion of how official statistics and some of the international survey programs have been thinking about data quality in the social sciences, just for everyone. So I'm just going to shift to slideshow mode. Can I just get a confirmation, Ron? Is that coming through now as a full screen presentation for you?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Okay, so just so I don't run over time for everyone, I will set myself a fixed limit there. Okay, so I've given this presentation actually a couple of times, including at the earlier in this this RDA session to a joint group, and then similarly to a SciDataCon session about 3 weeks ago. So this is an emerging thing that's certainly happening for multiple domains, where I've been asked to talk a bit about what are some of the themes around data quality, metadata quality in the social sciences, just to set the scene here. And within those domains, say, I think we can probably draw a contrast. The distinction I've drawn is really between, say, official statistics and the broader academic research domains. Now, I'm going to generalize here. So I say some of the presentations you'll see later in this session will talk to where some much more active efforts are to address these. But it's certainly the case that official statistics has tended towards having much stronger resourcing, strong emphasis on international integration than has been the case in the research domains. It's not to say they don't happen, but I'd say the resourcing differences really come out in terms of the what we can achieve realistically within those domains. So I draw those distinctions there. It's also a function fundamentally of what are the drivers sitting behind those. So government agencies, a lot of the official statistics within the social sciences really are for driving national and international, government policy. So the resourcing, has implications there as well. The international comparators become much more important, and decisions that that sit behind them. While we might value our academic outputs, the policy decisions that come from official statistics are likely to be much more consequential, and so we do see a lot more resourcing going in there. So while the efforts tend to be shared, they're not always as quality controlled as we might like, and that was one of the interests we had within the chairs and within the interest group here that has driven some of that thinking. So if we look at some of the efforts that exist here, well, fundamentally our international economic systems are underpinned by statistical frameworks, and we do see pretty well established standards actually occurring from those domains. So you'll see participation of the UN, the OECD, the World Bank, pretty actively involved in standards development. The UNECE, which is the European segment of the UN, tends to have carriage of that within the UN system, but you'll see major efforts actually emerging out of those communities. Probably the best known of which is the Statistical Data and Metadata Exchange, so the international standard for exchange of official statistics metadata. And it drives a lot of international banking and financial systems as well. So formalized structures of data exchange, metadata information, and they often include, in fact, data quality information as well. They tend to be highly oriented towards data quality to enable international and temporal comparison. And we have some pretty prominent examples of those. And I'll just point to those as a couple of examples of those we can draw upon. And the useful part about those is actually they are pretty actively used by social scientists as well. So within the academic community, we're able to leverage those efforts, effectively. So, and one example of those is this is the OECD's stat.oecd.org. There are parallel ones, often in different communities. The .stat framework is fundamentally a system that's driven under the hood by the STMX standard. And the screenshot I've got here, I say this is quarterly national accounts, GDP per capita, one that often feeds into a number of macroeconomic analyses, often uses a basis for comparative work. And you can draw these and you can directly point to the content that was in there. But we also get captured on the right-hand side of any of these accounts as well is metadata information around data quality as we go through a lot of these systems. So the STMX system actually allows us to capture those effectively as we go through. And I say, and these are automated systems that actually exist for that type of exchange. They're often underpinned as well by quality models sitting behind them. So again, I mentioned the UNECE. This is from the UNECE wiki. The International Statistical System, they have developed, let's say, a generic process model. So this is the generic statistical business process model, or GSBPM, that has, and this is the overarching business process model that describes the different activities that occur within the statistical domain, and some of the relevant activities that are going to be important here. And that from that generic process model, they've actually established quality indicators as well. So if you follow through the link that I have on the screen here, you can actually see there's a paper talking about where different quality indicators might be used at different points in the business process. And national systems have often adopted this business process model within countries. As I know within Australia, there is an Australian adoption of the GSBPM, the implementation of the international reference model. Alongside that then, and this is where unfortunately I was really hoping to hear from our Canadian colleagues, that you'll often see then data quality frameworks sitting behind those as well. So the Canadians have probably led the way on this in the international community. But in the Australian case, we have a quality framework, and it talks about 7 different dimensions of quality. So what's the environment in which the data is collected, its relevance and timeliness and accuracy, the coherence of the information that's collected, and whether it's interpretable and accessible. So giving a framework for being able to document those, and that's being rolled out across the Australian government in other agencies now as a framework for thinking about describing quality at least. So that's the international statistical domain. I say for some of us on this call and are involved in the DDI community, we've actually used some of those models as a starting point for thinking about data quality in the social science and the academic social sciences as well. Within the academic community, though, we have a much broader challenge. We have much more diversity of the sort of data types that we have, and the content that we're looking to assess, and also the methodologies that we're using. A broad range of activity, a broad range of content, and a long tail of research. So as someone who runs a data archive here in Australia, dealing with the breadth of content that we might be looking at makes it difficult for us to really be able to standardize around data quality. And so the methods are probably have taken much longer to develop, and it's been harder to establish those. We'll hear a bit more about those in the other speakers. But there are certainly national and international collections that exist, and there are efforts to do some of that standardization work. One of those is the European Social Survey as another of the EU funded programs. I'm also involved in the International Social Science Program. And there are others like the World Value Survey, where those international harmonisation do exist, often through coordinated central communities, central offices, and efforts to do some of that standardisation has occurred. The sorts of challenges that we tend to have to be thinking about there is whether the emphasis is on data and metadata quality, hence the description of this session. And a point of discussion is where might our efforts actually focus? Are we able to assess the quality of the metadata? And might that be a more effective domain to be thinking about than focusing on details around data itself? And one of the discussions in the SciDataCon community a couple of weeks back was actually, how do we understand data quality within and across domains is a challenge in itself. Might we think about fitness for purpose as an effort, or fitness for use as a framing there? Certainly we have larger assessments that do exist, and within the social sciences, a lot of effort on the DDI standard as a means for trying to at least standardize metadata quality efforts, so we have a framework we can work against effectively, which does enable to establish some assessment of metadata and data content. And there are some emerging for qualitative data as well, although these are much less established, would be probably the way to summarize that. There've also been automated data assessment tools that have been established. Some standalone tools, probably the best known of which is the QA My Data initiative at the UK Data Archive. You can certainly pick that tool up and have a look at that. My archive's done some work on assessing that as well. But there's a number of R packages and the like that have emerged for doing some data quality assessment. The sorts of things you see within those domains. This is a quick summary here. This is basically producing file checking, metadata checking activities and the like that are summarized from basically processing of metadata and data content in an automated way through system. QA My Data is intended as a user tool, in fact, to do that assessment. And I'm going to wrap up here that more broadly, you do then get more standardized effort, off with a significant amount of curatorial effort to do assessments of data quality and some of those cross-national efforts as well. And the European Social Survey has some nice descriptions of how they go about that. That you can have a look at as well at some time later. They include things like measurement quality, measurement equivalence, so comparability across countries. They often do socio-demographic compositions and quality control as well. And there's an example of here of the sorts of quality control reports that occur for each of the waves. This was out of the European Social Survey Wave 6. Similarly, there are those sorts of assessments for some of the other international programs as well. So we do see efforts actually starting to emerge, well, not starting to emerge, they've been established reasonably well in the academic domains. And now there's some more detailed efforts, and that's where we want to turn to in some of the next presentations as we go through. So I'm going to stop there and say our first presenter within the group is to my Christian and Lemore Pierre, who were involved in the CureFair group for efforts in looking at processing services for the social sciences from a program in America in particular. So, Tumo, do you want me to run the slides, or so I have them here, or are you happy to run? Hand over the share screen to you.
If you can allow me to share the screen, I can take control.
Yep. So there we go there. If you should be able to pick up from there, I think.
All right. And it's opening up now. Hopefully you can see that. How's that look?
Coming through.
All right, great. So I am here, I'm Tumai Christian. I'm from the Odom Institute at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And with me is Lemore Pierre, who's from the Institution for Social and Policy Studies, or ISPS, at Yale University. So we have been doing a lot of thinking. Both of our groups do have repositories, and we have been in the business of curating research data. And what we've learned is that there has been a lot of talk about data repositories, sharing your data. But even though that's become more known in the research community that sharing is important, that there are venues available to share data, a lot of these systems, a lot of the data in these systems don't necessarily meet the criterion of quality. And we've seen many studies where things have not been reproducible because of some issues, whether it's being able to access all of the data, not being able to understand it, or there are some issues with the data that preclude reproducibility. And so for both of our groups, since we're supporting research data and trying to provide access to the evidence that support published findings, we think of data quality in terms of computational reproducibility. And of course, there's so many related terms, but just to disambiguate for our context, to us, computational reproducibility as our quality criterion refers to those changes in scientific practice and reporting standards to accommodate the use of computational technology. So we're really focused here on quantitative analysis, wanting to be sure that we can get the same results that are published if we were to use the same data and code used in the original study. So
I'm sorry to interrupt for a second. I have a feeling that the slides are not advancing, at least on my screen.
Are they not advancing? I should have the definition up here.
I'm seeing the intro slide in presenter mode.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I have to go in presentation mode.
Let's try this again. Slideshow and just play. How about now?
No.
All right. How about we just leave it here? Would this be okay?
It's okay for me, but we'll probably have to move them manually.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Let's try this.
Interruption.
Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. I tested this earlier, I swear. But yes, so we're referring to computational reproducibility when we think of quality in our context. And to achieve that standard, we have been focused on the data quality review framework. And here's a citation here. Amy Moore was the main author on this paper. But we think of data quality review based on different actions that as curators that we take to ensure the quality of the materials. So a lot of us who have been in the repository business, we're very familiar with our file review, where we look into the submitted materials to make sure everything is there, that the file formats are okay for long-term reproducibility, things like that. The documentation, we go into the documents to make sure all of the contextual information we need to understand the materials are in there, that there are code books, methodology reports, and also the data review, where we go into the data set and make sure that there aren't any errors or issues with that, whether there may be wild codes or missing variables that aren't defined. We're looking for personally identifiable information. But there's also a third dimension that isn't in that curators right now, as far as we know, aren't practicing as much as these other three dimensions, and that is the code review. So along with all of those data curation activities that a lot of repositories are very familiar with, we're adding on to the code review. And for the code review section aspect of the data quality review, we're actually going into the code files and we're looking at the scripts. We're making sure that those scripts can be run on a computer other than the one that the original author used. So we're looking for file paths to make sure that those file paths are relative and not absolute, making sure that the code is commented, that there's some literate programming in there, that we can follow the analysis workflow in the scripts. A lot of times there are lots of packages that are loaded to run the analysis. So we want to make sure that those packages are identified. And then we do execute the code to make sure that it does run without any errors. And finally, once the code runs, then we compare those outputs to those outputs that are presented in the article or manuscript. So we're going through this entire workflow, not only curating the materials, but also taking a look at the analysis to make sure it works using those materials that were given to us. And so this is new to a lot of curators, but something that we feel is essential so that we can really promote the quality of the materials in our repositories. So all of these actions also align with FAIR, and we know a lot of us in the social sciences, FAIR is a new acronym, but it doesn't refer to new practices. And a lot of us in the social sciences and the repository world, we've been doing a lot of these things, identifiers, standard metadata, interoperability. But we wanted to be sure that people understand that this data quality review does fulfill a lot of the requirements and addresses a lot of those principles that come from FAIR. But one thing that we also understand is that going through this process can be very labor intensive. This is just a list of all those steps that are required to perform the data quality review from beginning to end. So I'm not going to read all of these, but you can imagine not only are there a lot of steps, but there are also a lot of different programs that we may need to use, whether we're communicating through email or in person to discuss the materials or any issues with the materials. We have our statistical software programs. Maybe we're getting those materials from different storage locations. If we're converting some scripts from something proprietary to something open source using stat transfer, for example, converting your Stata code to R code, and then also our repositories for storage. So there are lots of different things that we need to do until we can finally share that data and be able to certify that these data do support computational reproducibility. So that's one of the biggest challenges of this. And so the Yale Institution for Social and Policy Studies, where Limor is from, they have developed the Yale Application for Research Data, or YARD. And this is a great tool that really helps to manage that workflow. So it identifies different users in this workflow, your depositor, curators, and administrators. It structures that submission review, file processing and data publishing process, standardizes it into this nice workflow that aligns with the data quality review standards. So it's pretty great going from depositor all the way to the repository, and it's checking off all the boxes of all those things that you need to do for the data quality review. And that same workflow that YARD supports is what we use at the Odom Institute. We're supporting journal policies, the journals who require authors to submit their data in code. And then those materials have to go through an independent review, which the Odom Institute performs before the manuscripts are published. And so we have our data curation team, which reviews the materials. And then we have our verifiers who run the code, make sure the code looks good, that it's commented before we allow those materials to be published. And then the Cornell Center for Social Sciences is another group that we've been working closely with, and they have a pre-publication service where they work directly with the authors to go through their materials, go through this data quality review together to make sure that when they submit their materials to the repository, it does support computational reproducibility. So those are three different aspects of the way our three groups have been trying to address this. And so years ago, we came together and decided that we need to form a group. And so we did the Curating for Reproducibility Consortium. And so our goal is to support curation of research data and review of the code and all of those other associated materials, specifically for the purpose of facilitating the digital preservation of the evidence base necessary for future understanding, evaluation, and reproducibility of scientific claims. So now as curators, we're not looking at just data as digital objects to curate and to take care of, but we're looking at the larger context within which the data live. So not only those materials, but also to make sure those materials can be used for verifying published findings. And so with this group, what we want to do is share our practices. So the more people who are doing this, the more we can understand and develop standards, which is our second thing. We want to establish some standards around this practice. And then also promote data quality review, that we feel like that we need to skill up to do more of this code review and not just curating the data objects themselves. So we're pushing ourselves a little bit, but we feel like it's a necessary part of supporting 21st century science. So the other thing we've done is we created the Cure Fair Working Group. Some of you may be familiar with this, but this is an extension of our work where we're trying to work together as a broader community to establish these standards-based guidelines for curating these materials for reproducibility and fair. And so what we've done so far is we've been trying to take a snapshot of the current state of Cure Fair practices. So we've been identifying groups who are engaged in these practices, whether they have workflows, tools, however they can support this. We want to learn more about that. We're also looking at different definitions and how those definitions of reproducibility map to FAIR. And then finally, we're wrapping up right now with this group. So our final output is a report outlining those standards-based guidelines. And so what we've done is we want it to be digestible and something easy to adopt. So we have putting together the 10 Cure Fair things. And so we've started that, and we encourage everybody to contribute. So we've already gotten some feedback. We have our 10 things that you can see here. I won't read them all, but this is where we started. And I know many of you have different experiences in the space, so we would love for you to contribute. The short link is here. So if you go to that, put in some feedback. If there's anything missing, if there's anything that isn't quite clear, we would love to hear from you. So please take a look at that. And so early next year, we'll be able to present these to the community, and we will eventually have this on GitHub because we know things evolve in our space. And then we're also hoping that folks outside of the social sciences may be able to take some of these basic concepts and build off on these 10 things. So that's what we have been doing so far. And again, here are some links. The Cure Consortium, the website is under construction, but you could go ahead and bookmark that. Also join our working group and contribute to our FAIR things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tumai. I'll do a quick call for any clarification questions. As I say, we'll have a longer discussion later on. But any points of clarification from anyone?
And if nothing now, you could drop them in the notes, or you could always contact us.
Exactly. Yeah, please feel free to drop them into the notes or into the chat as well. So we want to come back to that in just a moment, I think. Okay. Moving forward, so we're now going to look at a series of efforts that are coming out of from our European colleagues. So the first of those being from Carsten Thiel at CESDA. Carsten, I can turn over to you for a bit of a description of the CESDA work you're working on.
Thank you. So I'll be talking about the CESDA Metadata Office. My name is Carsten Thiel. I'm CTO of CESTR. If you don't know what CESTR is, it's the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives. It's a European research infrastructure consortium. We have 22 members and 1 observer that are countries in Europe. We cover many European languages and also many countries, obviously. And in each of these countries, we have one archive, some of them with multiple decades of history, some just starting up. And we at CESTR see ourselves as the social sciences gateway to the European Open Science Cloud. So let's talk about metadata. We have the central CESTR data catalog, which is kind of the central collection of all the metadata records that we have from all the data holdings at our national service providers. We're using DDI codebook as the common metadata format to do this. And this is implemented through what we call the CESTR metadata model, which is the specific selection of a number of items from DDI to be used. Currently, our central catalog holds roughly 33,000 records in multiple languages, some in multiple languages, some only in one language. And all of this is accessible with a central search interface. We've been indexed in the Google Dataset Search since 2018, and we're currently working, and this should start next year, having a central ORE-PMH endpoint where you can get all this harvested CESTR metadata from all the archives from one single place. And this is also following the aggregator specification. So if you're harvesting also some of our archives independently, then you will automatically know that you have collected the data twice. So what's the point of the Metadata Office? Well, it's the central authority on all our metadata questions that we have within CESTR, and it maintains the CESTR metadata model. This is a complex model. I'll have the link for it a bit later. And what the Metadata Office model does is it defines this implementation for each of our individual services. And supports our archives in making these decisions. I've mentioned this earlier. We have archives that go back many, many decades. We have archives that are just starting up. So there's a lot of knowledge transfer that's needed to make sure that these new archives come up to speed with what's been going on in the other archives. And also, when you have decades of history, when you have old data records that go back many, many years, they may not be done in the exact way we would do it today. And they may not have been done absolutely consistently across all the different archives that we have. The Metadata Office also keeps track of ongoing metadata efforts. The Metadata Office keeps track of the ongoing metadata efforts globally, and we also adopt new challenges. So one among these topics are fair compliance. We'll be hearing a bit about this in a few minutes with the next two talks. Also interoperability, how this relates to policies, our own data policies, but also within the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud framework, how this all interacts. Now, I mentioned these interpretations of how metadata is being used by the service providers is not always 100% identical. And this had led to some challenges we faced in our data catalog, which is why we've implemented what's known as DDI profiles. It's a mechanism within the DDI standard that gives a machine-readable specification of how exactly the individual metadata fields should be used and how exactly the strings should be formatted, which date formats are acceptable and which aren't. So it has to be a machine-readable date format and not an expression like sometime in the early 19th century. We have these profiles available for both study level metadata, that's what you're seeing in the CESTR data catalog, but also for question level metadata. That's for our upcoming question bank. Now, these machine readable specifications, they're all nice, but the real applicability, of course, comes when you put them into a tool that can automatically check it. And for that, we have the CESTR metadata validator, which can check this compliance. So it can take a DDI record, it can take it can take the profile and then check this individual record against this profile. This helps us harmonizing the interpretation of the standard across all of our archives and make sure that all of it is compliant. So this is also about to be used, not right now, but we're working on starting to do it as an automated quality assurance mechanism while we harvest from our central archives. So I said this earlier, next year we plan to be harvested, or we're going to be harvestable via our EPMH, and obviously this is to make us more visible in the European Open Science Cloud, but any other larger data catalog is welcome to harvest us as well. The idea is that we can make guarantees about the quality of our metadata, that it has actually run through these automated tests. Of course, we have other levels of quality behind that, having Quadra Seal certifications at the archives, having experts who curate the metadata before it gets published. But there's always this human aspect of how do you explicitly express a certain object, and this is a certain item, and this is what the metadata validator is supposed to improve. I have a few more links. I can paste them also in the minutes and in the chat for you to reference, but they will also be available in the slides. And there is even a very concise introductory video to the Metadata Office that you can watch after the session if you want to learn more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carsten. I say I'm fascinated by terrible name in the metadata validator to be able to say that on a regular basis, but as a concept, it's fantastic.
I must say I was stumbling a few more times today than I'm used to. But, yeah.
It just doesn't roll off the tongue, but as a function, fantastic. So I'll be looking at that one further. So we're going to turn to any quick questions for clarification from anyone. No,
may I ask it?
Yes,
it takes too long to type.
Sure.
It's just about the effort required from researchers to prepare and enter their metadata. I'm speaking from a Brazilian perspective in which they have to do it themselves. Okay, there's no support whatsoever. So in the end, the metadata is not that good quality, and the effort required. I've seen some researchers who entered blah, blah, and I had to call them and say, this is not acceptable as, an abstract of your data. So what kind of advice can you give me, or what kind of similar problems are you who have already spoken in the session? Give me either now or afterwards. Thank you.
Perhaps Carsten, I guess your tool would probably identify the issues, the responses.
Well, actually, no, it does not identify that you've put in blah, blah. It will identify that you did not put in an abstract, because within SESDA, there's two layers. There is the archives in the countries that take on the data, that also support the researcher in taking it on. And they do generally do the quality assessment on the first level. Now, some of them have also started to have self-deposit solutions. And there, this is starting to become a problem. The blah blah issue is not an issue I'm familiar with, but there's the obvious problem of people not filling in all the fields that were left as non-mandatory, as optional, and many researchers not necessarily bothering to fill this in. That is certainly a problem, and it's one of the things we're looking into, how to at least catch it and make visible to the people who want to reuse it what the curation level is. So has a data steward looked at this record? Has this been prepared? And then we're not only talking about the metadata, but also about the actual data. Is this a random Excel file that you can't really do much with? Or does this follow the standardized format that the archive uses for the properly curated DDI datasets? That's something we're looking into, in at least making sure the researcher understands what they're finding in the catalog. Addressing the issue of what's actually being entered, we're doing a lot of training. We do have a very successful resource. It's called the SESDA Data Management Expert Guide that gives a lot of explanations on how this should be done properly. But we don't have a technical solution to force people to do it correctly, unfortunately. I don't have an answer for that. Yeah.
I would say in the experiences, say, so I have a team doing this sort of curation as well, and I think the interesting, that sometimes it's humans. How do we identify those things as we go through? Some of those, like, I think aligning some of the quality assurance tools with the self-deposit tools is probably the solution for the future. It's make it easy to identify what the issues are and how to fix them. Is probably the direction. It might be a discussion we come back to, though, as later in this session, because I say the QA my data, was an example of trying to do some of that work, but where you can take that. I might turn to Marty now to look a little bit at some of the metadata extraction work that's going on as well. But that's a good topic to come back to. I think it's this is one of the themes I'd be interested in exploring further amongst this group. Marty, can we turn to you?
So can you hear? What can you see?
Yep, the screen's fine, and I can hear you coming through just fine.
Great. I think that also Claudia presented an interesting question, and I'd be happy to discuss it further, coming from an archive that does this kind of metadata curation. So we have a lot of experiences, and I have some use what is cost efficient way of gathering the metadata. And it includes things like data management plans and information flow from one tool to another. But the topic that I have today, so my name is Mari Klemla. I decided to use my SESTA hat today. So I'm a SESTA Tools Working Group leader, but I come from the Finnish Social Science Data Archive, and I'm a development manager there. The title given to me was New Data Types and Metadata Extraction Developments. So I think there are two separate things here, but I'm decided to go and present some new initiatives or developments that I find interesting in these areas. So with that, I will skip the SESTA introduction because Karsten already did that, and jump directly into new data types. And well, what is new? That depends on the viewpoint. So I think Stephen already mentioned statistical data. So that's kind of new for social science data archives, at least. So we know it exists, but we really, not many of us have worked with it, at least not within SESTA data archives. Other new kinds of data might be statistical data, administrative data. So not statistical, but from administration. And there are others, but today I just wanted to highlight some work on social media data that SESTA has been doing. And whatever new data type we are dealing with, they will pose various challenges. And these are methodological, legal, ethical, cultural, technological, so you name it. There are always challenges, but usually, and especially when thinking of quality of metadata and data, more automated processes are needed. For example, for extracting data and associating it with relevant metadata. And I think that in many cases, the quality of data comes back to quality of metadata and having sufficient metadata. And I think metadata is almost anything is metadata. So even PIDs, I think, are metadata. So in that sense, and information about data collection, and so that's metadata. So I'm going to talk a little bit about social media data, because that's something that SESTA has been working on. The simple definition for this is any data generated by users of social media platforms, and there are plenty of those. And this is, of course, interesting for social scientists. It's the environment we live and the community we live in now. This will also be of interest to future researchers if we can archive this data. And I mean, that's a big challenge as well. Legal reasons, for example, and ethical reasons come into play, but also very technical reasons, technical perspectives and metadata things. So and why researchers want to do this is also that linking social media data will just provide so many more research opportunities. So things like using Twitter data to assess attitudes towards US presidents, for example. I think that's something that's been done, and that's been linked to survey data. So I decided to focus a little bit on the documentation challenges that we've within CESTA have identified, and this you can see the sources there. So we have colleagues from GESIS, mainly GESIS, but also other data archives have been working on these. And there are a couple of publications, and Karsten already mentioned the CESTA Data Management Expert Guide. So you will find information on social media data there as well. The main challenges, I think, from quality viewpoint are that you probably don't know and can't know the technical details about the data collection process. So the collection, data collection from Twitter, for example, or Facebook, that can be done by researchers themselves, but and in cooperation with the social media companies. But usually there's some kind of API involved, and then they usually tend to provide only samples of the data, and the sampling algorithms, they are black boxes for researchers. And this is a huge problem for many reasons, but for quality as well, and validation and so on. There are no specific standards or methods for documentation of social media data. The standards we tend to use, so basically DDI codebook, DDI lifecycle, they do lack elements that would need it for detailed description. Versioning of data is a huge issue. So what is the version you are referring to? And sometimes you can't even actually have the data. You need to have only the references to, for example, Twitter posts in your data, not the actual Twitter texts. And yeah, usually metadata for findable, that's usually easily done. But if you want to reuse something and have the metadata for that, that's where the challenge is. I posted a question here, could DDI CDI be a solution here? Maybe it could. I don't have the answer, but I think that's something to explore. So this was a very, very short overview of what's going on with social media data, and you can read more, take a look at the sources. There are also YouTube videos on CESTA's channel. So now I will skip to the other part, and that's the metadata extraction developments. Of course, you can extract social media data, you can extract some metadata, but when I think of metadata extraction, so the first two things that came to my mind that are very recent and I find very interesting, although I'm not myself involved in either of the project, in these tasks or projects, but I think these are worth highlighting here for this audience. So I will present two examples. The other one is from the SHOCK project, and it's the multilingual corpus of survey questionnaires. And the other one is from related to Closer project, and that's a machine learning pipeline. And they both deal with questionnaires and questionnaire metadata. So I'm not going to go into details into this picture that I've copied or stolen from the SHOCK colleagues' presentation. You can see the source there. So Diana Zavala Rojas and her colleagues. The multilingual corpus for survey questionnaires, that's a tool for ensuring that the same question is asked across languages so that we have the same meaning. So this is, of course, improving data quality. And you can also use it as a tool to analyze systematically previous errors and successes in questionnaires. So they have a lot of questionnaires from these mentioned social service, ESS, EVS share, and the wage indicator in this corpus. And this is a tool for the improvement of the best practices, both during the design and then the translation phase of survey questionnaires. So you have in several languages the same corpus there. So their metadata is actually a simplified subset of the DDI codebook metadata, and they are using CSV files instead of XML files, and they have also included linguistic metadata. They are using, for example, universal POS tags that are used to mark the core part of speech categories. So things like this is a verb, or this is an adjective, or things like that. So I think it's an interesting thing, combining social science approaches and linguistic approaches and these metadata models. So there's a lot of information about that on the internet, so on SOC website, and there are some publications and presentations. And it's the beta version is also available. You need to register, but it's free, and you can go and take a look at that and do some searches and so on. So I would urge everybody to take a look at it. The link is there as well. Then I'm really rushing through all this, but the other very, very interesting thing that we are seeing is this project to creating this machine learning pipeline for automating metadata extraction. So using AI, they are taking questionnaires that are usually in PDFs, and they are extracting the items there, so survey questions, so response categories, and so on. And the goal is to have all that information in DDI lifecycle in this project. Usually that's a big challenge. So I know in my archive we do that manually in many cases. So we have students working on that. They are cheap labor, but still it's a lot of work and it's manual work. So this is part of this project, is to see how that could be automated and see how that could be scalable. So they are using Closer Discovery. So that's a huge, it's actually running on Collectica. So a lot of metadata in DDI lifecycle. So they are using that as a training data set for this machine learning, this artificial intelligence. And they are exploring these approaches and try to classify the past text from questionnaires and try to make a valid DDI from it. And they will, I mean, this is, there's a paper forthcoming, but this is also my chance to pitch the forthcoming European DDI user conference. It's the last day of November, first day of December. It's free, registration is needed, but they will have a presentation there. And I think that should be very, very interesting for this audience, as will the whole EDI conference. So these were some insights on what's going on, not all CESTA, but CESTA is also, of course, involved in coordinating SOC actually. New data types was all CESTA work, and Closer, we are working together with the Closer people, the CESTA data archives as well. So that was all I wanted to say today. So thank you for listening.
Any points of clarification from Marty? All good. Thank you so much, Marty. Let's hope I've posted links to a couple of the documents you pointed to there. In fact, the social media one is certainly one that has been on my agenda for a little while as well. So I'll be going back to that one. But the machine learning paper, say, is now up on the EDI website as well. So I've just posted that into the link as well. All right, so lastly, we'll turn to Ingrid Dillo, who's going to talk a bit about the Fuji and some of the metadata checking automated tools as well. So Ingrid, I'll pass to you.
Thanks, and let's see whether I can put my slides in slideshow mode. Yeah, can you see it?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Steve, and hi everyone. My name is Ingrid Dillo. I come from DANS in the Netherlands, a data service provider with strong roots in the social sciences and humanities. DANS is a member also of CESTA, but the context that I will be talking today is not CESTA so much, but more the FAIR's FAIR project. So I'll start with a little project pitch. FAIR's Fair is a European project funded by the European Commission, and really a project that runs in the context of the creation of the European Open Science Cloud. And the project is already well on its way. It will end early spring next year. And as you can see on this slide, we have 22 different partners that are involved in the project from 8 member states in Europe. And amongst them, you will see data service providers, repositories, research performing organizations like universities, but also international organizations like CODATA and also the RDA itself. The overall goal of this project is really to supply practical solutions for the use of the FAIR data principles, and this throughout the whole research data lifecycle. And we have a strong focus on fostering a FAIR data culture and the uptake of good practices. Now, there is a very strong link in all of this with the realization of that EOSC, that European Open Science Cloud, that is meant to become in Europe a virtual trusted environment that cuts across geographical borders in Europe, but also across disciplines to share and reuse data. And you could see the mission of FAIR's Fair in that context as one of the projects that needs to implement the FAIR principles in the policies and the practices and the data and services of this EOSC. Now, I said the project is well on its way, and we already produced 145 outputs that you can all find in our FAIR's Fair collection on Zenodo. But they come in all sorts and shapes. But like I said, with an emphasis on policies and practices. So there is a very broad range of activities, for example, supporting semantic comparability, but also formulating policy recommendations for funders. A lot of work concentrates on certification and support for FAIR enabling repositories. And we also have quite a substantive strand of work around training and professionalization. And in the next couple of weeks, I think at the end of the year, we will also publish a FAIR adoption handbook for universities to give you some idea of the different topics that we deal with. Now, in case you want to know more, here you have a couple of links, and I'll make the slides available for the group. And we will have our final conference early next year with a public session on the 26th of January. So if you want to hear more, please save that date. Now, let's talk about assessing the fairness of data. Assessing that fairness can, of course, be useful throughout the whole life cycle of research data. But in the project, we really focused on 2 points in that circle, and we produced 2 tools. One is called FAIR-Aware, and FAIR-Aware is really focused on the FAIR assessment before depositing data. And the other one is called Fuji. And Fuji is placed, as you can see on this slide, more in the area of FAIR assessment to evaluate data for reuse. What I need to say is that fairness is, of course, only one dimension, I think, when you talk about metadata and data quality. It's a kind of a technical dimension, you could say, that you test, and it has nothing to do, of course, with the scientific quality of the data, the science that the data come from. And it also doesn't say anything about this element of fitness for purpose that Steve was already talking about. And I also need to say that this is not a specific tool for the social sciences. It's a generic project, so this tool is also generic. One slide on FAIR-Aware, the other tool. This is really a tool that is focused or aimed at researchers and data stewards. It's an online tool that helps to raise awareness and to educate on the FAIR data principles. And it is all concentrated around 10 simple questions that hold a lot of practical tips to improve the data fairness before deposit. It also refers you to all kinds of sources. So very, very useful. And we hope to have the final release next week. But you can already visit the links and you will get an impression of the tool already. Now, I want to zoom in a little bit closer on the Fuji tool. And that tool is really intended, like I said, to evaluate the fairness of data in repositories before reuse. Now, in this project, we started its development by identifying data object assessment metrics. So we, and you can see them here on the screen, for all the principles, we came up with metrics. And these metrics really became the core for us to evaluate the fairness of data objects. And it's important to stress also that these metrics didn't come falling from the air. We really based all of that on prior global work, for example, that of the RDA working group on the Fair Data Maturity Model. And I think the session is running parallel to this one. But also on the work of the EOSC FAIR working group. So these metrics have also been iteratively improved throughout the period of this project, but they really form the basis of the assessment. Now, the Fuji tool runs practical tests against those metrics, and it's an automated tool really to support the programmatic assessment of published data sets. And it supports repositories in that evaluation of the data that they hold. Fuji adheres to existing web standards, and it also utilizes external registries and resources. And the tool is currently also available in a testing environment, and the source code is available on GitHub. So it's all out there for you to examine and test. And you have the links on the screen. So here you see what it looks like in the automated version, because initially this tool was really designed for machine interaction. And in that case, the output is given as a score in JSON format. But we also use the assessment score to identify areas of improvement. And I think that that is an essential element of this tool, because to this purpose, the tool also provides output with a lot of useful debug messages and uses a really verbose language. And all of that then can help you to improve, further improve the fairness of the data set. And at the same time, we also worked on a web-based graphical user interface that allows also fair data assessment tests with Fuji, and then in a human-friendly way. And we really believe that that tool could also be useful for repositories, but again, also for researchers themselves, for publishers, for people who want to reuse a data set. So you see an example here on the screen, and it shows that we do not present a kind of binary pass or fail when it comes to fairness, but we try to give you a kind of idea of the level that the data set is in for the different principles, and it gives you an overall percentage of fairness. So I run the tool. I took a DOI from a data set from the social sciences around COVID, and I ran the tool, and here you can see the results. So this particular data set has an overall score of 54% of fairness. And you can see the spread around the 4 different principles. So for 2 principles, the score was moderate. For 2 others, it was only initial. So there is room for improvement there. And then not only this score is given, but also the report. So here you see for this report, for example, if you look at the metrics for findable, you can see that the second metric to assess the findability is that the data is assigned a persistent identifier. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see that the tool says that this test was done successfully because there is a persistent identifier scheme present. The data set has a DOI. But then if you look at the third metric, the fourth, sorry, metadata includes, the metadata include the identifier of the data that they describe. And you look at the report there, the tool found out that the data is missing, that the metadata is not in the, the persistent identifier is not in the metadata. So there they give a warning, and that then can be used by the producer or the repository to improve. So it not only gives you a score, it also gives you the tools for improvement. And I think here I will stop because we want to keep some time for discussion, and I want to stop with the invitation to all of you. Please go to those websites and try it out for yourself. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ingrid. And I'll start with, say, any questions, follow-ups for Ingrid?
Ah, it's nice, the comment from Mari. Indeed,
Yeah.
we work together with a lot of repositories. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to highlight, it's a great tool. There's room for improvement as always, but I think it's what we've learned in EOS Nordic is well, 30% of the repositories didn't have any machine actionable metadata at all. So I think that's a significant finding. So there's a lot of work to do in the basic ground level. But also what we have learned during the process is that the repositories are very quick to improve their metadata with tricks just to get a higher FAIR score. And while that's in a way that's fine, you can do that, but I mean then we need to be careful, as you said, Ingrid, that what it really measures and how we use it, because you can basically add blah 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 if it's in the correct form, and then you get the points.
Yeah.
But I think it's a nice tool, and it's been a great journey because I know EOS Nordic has given a lot of feedback, and the tool has been improved based on that feedback, and it's yeah, I like it a lot. So.
Yeah,
hope it will be sustained after the project.
Yeah, we plan to. Yeah, and I think it's key that you have that two-way conversation between, you know, the producers of the tool, but also the repositories that have tested. I mean, together we come to a better result. Yeah, definitely.
I think there's an interesting dynamic there as well. I say there's a third part to it though, which is actually the producers of the software sitting behind it. So we're a Dataverse user, but we're using an older version. We're in the process of upgrading. Now, if I compare the current versus the older versions, then, you know, so the ADA's content doesn't come, you know, rates about, I've just run one of them through, we get about a 40% score. But if, you know, put some of the newer entry, you know, let's say where I know there's the newer versions of the software, then you get a higher ranking as well. And so there's interesting dynamic of you know, who's relatively involved in that process as well, I think, which is worth thinking about as well.
But there is also a danger to it, because it can lead its own life and become some kind of you know, a binary measure for people to say this is rubbish or this is good. So we also always need to be very careful there, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and also especially I think when thinking of social science data, which cannot necessarily well, can't be open all the time. So maybe you never get 100%. And then you need to know that this score, even 60, 70, that's great for your community, and that's the target. And then that needs to be communicated to those basically funders, I think, because there's the risk that the questions you get 60%, somebody else gets 91. Why? And it's just because of the different kind of data and restrictions to access.
So any questions for Ingrid and the other presenters as well? So we want to look at some next steps for where to take some of this with the 10 minutes we've got left. I don't see any hands up, so we might just look then to as to where to take. We had 3 ideas. So as I said, the aim of this session was really to focus, you know, on what's already going on, and I think that, what we've seen already in this session, there's quite a lot of activity that, and programmatic activity, actually, it's well organized, that's been occurring in the community thus far. Some of which is, within the social sciences community itself, some, in cross-domain areas. So the question was really for this, this group, is what can the interest group do here as an effort to possibly coordinate activity, but also, well, what might be some specific, activities that we could, be acting on, possibly as a working group activity looking forward. Ron, you've got a comment just there. Did you want to?
Yeah. What I see is a lot of control, and that will contribute to better metadata, we hope. But in a way, these are the sticks. What would be carrots that induces people to have good metadata quality from the start?
What might those be?
I think this is something that has been discussed before, but and they are always new. But seeing data as a publication, that's one of the things, because publications are usually the things that are counted when money is allocated. And I think also these things should be metadata issues should be seamlessly integrated in the tools that the researchers use. So be it, for example, data management plans or tools to create data management plans. So they enter the information once, and then it should be usable for other tools. Or when they are using SPSS, for example, you should be able to extract good metadata from that or other tools. So this should be invisible for the researcher, basically.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem is the researcher is not the beneficiary of their own metadata. In most cases, are they? It's actually someone further down the track. Yeah.
Just out of the box, what if you would get $100 if your data set is reused? So your own research council pays you $100 if someone else uses or reuses and publishes with your data set.
Well, some group who's responsible for fund. I mean, there is an interesting dynamic there. So, I mean, I'm involved in a couple of conversations
we have
about.
To be careful with European Social Survey, because they have 100,000 plus users. But
yeah. But that question about justifying value for the producer, the counts matter for them further down the track, as you say, you get more money to come back and do the things you've been doing by demonstrating that what you've been doing is being used as well. Interesting. Again, the incentives there, as you say, are on the, what the incentive structure might be there is an interesting thing to think about. Look, Limor, you've got a comment there.
Yeah, I was just wondering, sort of thinking about Ingrid's talk and Fuji about assessing FAIR and assessing quality more generally, about whether this group might have a role in thinking about what is the governance of these kind of assessments overall? Like, if people may come to different conclusions about the quality of a data set or a deposit, how is that adjudicated? Who decides these things? So I was wondering if that kind of question might be within scope.
To me, yeah. I mean, we kind of posited two ideas. One was, sort of defining what the nature of quality here might be, and if you take that a little bit further, then be able to, in a sense, just define a profile for a domain. Pick up Mari's idea as well, is within a given domain, or what might be, a set of expectations there. So, I mean, that's a social science specific sort of consideration there. Of, as I say, I have real trouble with that idea of trying to think. Think about, well, what is I mean, it's a capacity constraint as much as anything, but assessing data quality, that fitness for purpose side of it becomes very difficult. The fitness for use side, and this, is an interesting dimension there. But what might people be looking for? That was one of the working activities we were thinking about here, is sort of trying to conceptualize, as to how we might think about that. I think there's an interesting question there about how that might feed into some of the automated assessment tools, and how we might look at advice that runs alongside that. I think is an interesting corollary of that that we could pick up. Claudia, you've got a question there.
Yes, thank you. It concerns a report from the UK that I read a couple of years ago. I'll put my hand down afterwards. And that it analyzed lots of open data repositories. And the conclusion, from what I remember, that's the problem too, but that was very startling to me, is that social science and humanities data are not that reused, because it depends, of course, on the domain. If it's statistics, it's okay, but most of the others are not that much reused, because researchers will claim that a given questionnaire is not the one he or she is looking for, or a given methodology is not applicable, or whatever. So there's lots of care in metadata curation and storing data and making data available, but not so much reuse. This is a question whether this is true or not. And the second is that since lots of the data are sensitive, it's really hard to measure reuse, because the reusers would have to ask for permission, and the person who created the data would have to report. So it would be a matter of trust, isn't it? So that's two questions.
I'll respond on the second one, which is, right now that's kind of hard to do. So I'm literally working on a project to try and bring together that information much more effectively. So it's probably the case, we think, that you can bring together a series of persistent identifiers to connect up the dots much more. That actually helps to tie in and streamline that that approval process. But it is certainly the case that be able to track through that that flow of information is not that easy right now. But as I say, so I've got a funded project working on that. The measurement of reuse side, I think, is probably getting much more active focus. The California Digital Library, I'm trying to think there was a project they were running, and it slipped out of my head. Certainly, looking at standard indicators of download use. I mean, the problem is demonstrating reuse as well, connected to publications, but things like Scholex, things like so just tracking the download activity and the like become a part of that you can be looking. And there are some some work programs that are actually looking at standardized measures of those as well, so that you get common reporting. Make Data Count was the name of the one I was thinking about. That would be relevant there. You could pick up as well. So yeah, there's certainly some activities there. Look, folks, we've come to time, so I think we kind of need to wrap up here. But where I do want to sort of leave the discussion here is certainly to touch on those last, just the proposed next steps. And I've highlighted in the session notes here. I'm just going to drop in here probably three activities that we're going to be discussing amongst the chairing group, and we'd be interested in, and I'm pleased to see that some have indicated you'd be interested in being involved as well. I think probably the three papers there, and picking up a bit more on that final discussion that we had there, that is notions of defining metadata quality and data quality, and for the social sciences. Probably a couple of conceptual papers is was two of the outputs we were considering there. So we're certainly keen to see and will communicate to to those involved on participation in that going forward. The third one that when we proposed this at the time was a working group looking at data quality within and across domains. I think there's actually been a number of, and I've posted them in the session notes, even at this plenary, a couple of sessions on data quality across domains and within domains. And I think one of the other things we'd be looking to do is reach out to those groups and to see if there might be a more active working group established. Thanks, Marty. There's an EOS task force as well. And so that's probably the third activity we will be looking to going forward. So I'd expect when it comes to future plenaries that participation in a BOF to establish a likely cross-domain group would be one of the other outputs we'd expect to see going forward. So if you do have an interest in that as well, please feel free to indicate in the notes and elsewhere. But say those are certainly the three ideas that we're looking to take forward with this group. And then next time round, I think we'll probably have a follow-up working session on data quality within the domain within the social sciences as will probably be the theme of our next step as well, picking up some of the conceptualization work that we're proposing there. From here, we'll be certainly looking to reach out. We'll post some materials on the outputs of this discussion today on the Interest Group site, and we're looking probably to convene some activities in the interim. But for today, I want to thank everyone for just a really great set of presentations to see the work that's been going on and the breadth of activity. I think there is a grounds for picking up this, some dedicated work here that we will look to communicate. And so we look forward to working on this program area more into the future. So from the co-chairs, thank you all, and enjoy the plenary, which is due to start in 15 minutes. I have to concede I'm going to go back to bed at that point.
Thank you. Good night.
Keep well, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.